All right, everybody. So again, for you guys, as you work through this, this is basically replacing notes that we would do in class. So essentially, as you guys come to a new slide, you should pause this, kind of copy everything down, like usually how I give you time in class to write, and then once you've got everything, hit play and kind of add to your notes accordingly as I talk about stuff. So we are going to go on to now look at eukaryotic cells, and this is going to be the next several sets of notes are basically going to be looking at eukaryotic cells and their components, their functions. So first, today and tomorrow, we're just going to be kind of looking at some of the basic structures that we find with a eukaryotic cell. Okay. So first up is the cell wall. And again, if you haven't yet, you should pause and write this down and then hit play again. So the cell wall, very similar to prokaryotic cells. It is, as we talked about yesterday, found in every kingdom except for animals. So the other eukaryotic kingdoms, plants, fungi, protists, all have cell walls. Has the same function as in prokaryotes, right? So again, the idea here is that this basically provides kind of structure, framework, support for the cells. Just like in other cells, right? This is the most outer layer. Okay, so it's the very outside of the cell, right? And it is made of different things in those different kingdoms, though. Both of these here are in fact carbohydrates. So both cellulose and chitin, those are words we talked about a little bit in the last unit. Those are carbs, okay? But cellulose is a specific type of carbohydrate we find in the plant kingdom and plant cell walls. And chitin, that word is not pronounced chitin, it's pronounced chitin. That is found in fungi cell walls. The chitin, that's the same stuff that we talked about forming exoskeletons in like insects and crustaceans. So like that's what like a lobster shell is made out of chitin. That's the same thing then that you find in fungi in these cell walls, right? Cellulose in plants, that's basically responsible for kind of this rigid, but yet sometimes flexible framework we find in plants. So if you think about like eating celery and you get the little, kind of strings of celery like stuck in your teeth, that is basically cellulose, right? So it's this pretty strong structure that still has some flexibility to it, right? And so that's what we find making up the cell walls in eukaryotic cells. This is just an example here of what a cell wall might kind of look like. So this is a plant cell here. And so the green that you're seeing here, this is basically the cell wall. Okay. And then this little thin layer you're seeing right there, that would be the cell membrane, which we're going to talk about in a second. There would be like another cell over here and another cell up here and another cell over here, right? So like this kind of one border you're seeing here would basically be the cell wall for this cell that's over on this ridge, right? But you can see again, kind of like we talked about with prokaryotes, the cell wall is thicker, and again, kind of provides that framework, right? That support system for the cell. In eukaryotes, they also have a plasma membrane. This is basically the same as in prokaryotes. Later in this unit, we're going to kind of circle back to the plasma membrane and talk about some of its specific functions. But for now, you guys just kind of need to know the basics. So remember, if it does the same thing as in a prokaryotic cell, that means that it regulates what goes in and out, right? And structurally, it is made out of those phospholipids. So remember, I drew this on the board yesterday, right? It's made up of a phospholipid bilayer, where you have kind of two layers. Sorry, this is kind of hard to draw with a mouse. You have two layers of these, opposite facing phospholipids that make up the border of that cell, and that regulates what goes in and out, right? The cytoplasm, again, similar to prokaryotic cells, so that means that this is a region, right? And it is a region that in eukaryotes is kind of defined as everything from the plasma membrane to the nuclear envelope. And we're going to talk about the nuclear envelope. Basically, it's everything from the plasma membrane to the inside where the nucleus of the cell is. So that's going to contain cytosol, which again is that like fluid portion of the cell. It's going to contain all of the little organelles, all of these subcomponents inside of eukaryotes that have different, specific jobs. It's going to include all of the nutrients that our cells, have consumed. Like all of that is basically existing within this region inside of that cell. Okay. So here's just another look at what the plasma membrane kind of looks like, right? So you can kind of see, like, here's your individual little phospholipids, right? And you got a bunch of these little guys. These purplish, bluish things here, those would be the proteins. Remember we talked about yesterday how there are proteins embedded in that membrane that can help to kind of shuttle things across. We're going to talk about lots of other functions that membrane proteins accomplish as well. But one of the big ones is, in fact, shuttling molecules across that membrane, either in or out, that can't just simply, kind of cross right through that, because again, that phospholipid bilayer is selectively permeable, right? It only lets certain things through. So those proteins kind of help with allowing other stuff to get through that needs to get through. Okay. So we're now going inside the cell, and we're going to talk a little bit about the nucleus. Okay, so the nucleus, when you guys were in middle school, you maybe heard at some point like to think about the nucleus as like the brain of the cell. I don't really love that analogy. I'd prefer for you to erase that from your minds, because the nucleus itself is just like a housing compartment. Okay, if you want to kind of go along the brain analogy, think of the nucleus as your skull, right? As like the bone, and inside the bone is our brain, right? Inside the nucleus is the DNA. That's the important stuff that actually like controls everything, that makes that cell function in the way that it does, that makes us as organisms who we are, right? It's not the nucleus that does that. It's the DNA that's inside the nucleus. So the nucleus's job is to just basically hold the DNA, right? It's this kind of just, container for the DNA inside of the cell. And then it also controls access, right? So we'll talk about how there are things that go inside of the nucleus and outside of the nucleus, and there has to be this kind of passageway back and forth. So very much like the cell membrane regulates what kind of gets access to the cell, the nucleus regulates what gets access to the DNA, and it's going to kind of pick and choose like what can get inside and what can go out. The structure of this thing is pretty similar to the plasma membrane, so it's made up of a phospholipid bilayer. It's got some different proteins in it, so it's not exactly the same as this, but it does have these these same kind of phospholipids that are making of that thing. Okay, and then the nucleus itself has kind of several components that we're going to talk about. So at this point in the screencast here, this is running in outline form. So like if I go to this next slide here, sorry, skip ahead. This is now A. So this should be like indented underneath number 4, right? You like 1, 2, 3, 4, and now it's going to be A, and there's going to be a B, and then you go back out to the number. This is going in outline form. So these are basically now the subcomponents of the nucleus that we're going to talk about next. Okay. But as just kind of your general structure, again, this here would be one entire cell, and some of the little organelles inside of it that you can see here, and we're going to talk about eventually what all of those do. This structure right in the middle, right, that's the nucleus, and then this is supposed to kind of be the DNA inside of it. Okay, if we zoom in basically on just that, right, then sorry, I don't know why the ink is doing that. This is what the nucleus looks like, where it's, again, just kind of this, spherical, like contained structure. And inside you have the DNA for that cell. Notice that in this little structure here, you basically have pores all over that surface, which we'll talk more about tomorrow. But that is an important part, right, of kind of controlling access. So again, things are going to go in and things are going to come out. Okay, so that nucleus does in fact have pores that run through it. Okay, so inside the nucleus, again, now this should kind of be indented underneath part A. you've got DNA, right? That's its main job, to hold the DNA. So I'm going to have you guys just copy this down for right now, and then this is actually where I'm going to pick up tomorrow. So we'll start here, but get this into your notes before class, and then I'll talk about this slide tomorrow in class. If you finish this and you've still got time left with the remainder of class period, then you can work on those concept questions that are due tomorrow. Okay. We'll take time for Q&A at the beginning of class tomorrow on any of the stuff that I presented in this, and then we'll just kind of keep playing. Have a good afternoon and evening.